Thank you very much, John. I have the honor and pleasure of introducing the Lord Lyon, and I've had the honor and pleasure of meeting him on a couple of previous occasions. He was with us 5 years ago in North Carolina for Highland Games, and he was with us 2 years ago in Washington, D.C. for Tartan Day. Both occasions made major presentations. And he travels to the States quite a bit. Some of you may have met him. If you haven't, there's going to be plenty of opportunities to meet him because he's here a great deal. His biography is in your program near the back, and I'm not going to read that in great detail, except to say a couple of things very briefly, and then I'm going to ask Dr. Bruce Dury, who has known Lyon since they were boys, I'm told. God knows what they were up to then. To kind of add a little bit of a human touch to it while we have a Lyon coming online. This is truly a Renaissance man. He's an Episcopal priest. He's canon of the cathedral in Dundee and Glamis Castle. He was a former Labour Party politician in Dundee and held pretty high office there, Vice Lord Lieutenant of the city. He's an attorney. Taken silk, practiced law in Scotland, and as Lord Lyon, King of Arms, he is a sitting judge. Lyon Court is a judgeship, and he is a officer of the Queen's Household for Scotland, where he conducts all sorts of state ceremonial, some involving the royal family and other occasions, the Order of Thistle, etc. He's a very busy guy. He's a very human, down-to-earth person, very sharp sense of humor, and I found him to be very affable, charming, easy to talk to. He tells me he had a parish as an Episcopal priest somewhere in the Midwest United States. I don't remember where, but when he was a young man. So he's very familiar with and fond of America. Dr. Dury, would you like to add anything salacious about Lyon Morrow before we bring him online? And he's probably going to hear what you have to say. I think they're hooking him up now.
This is the only person I know who actually has the power to put me in prison. So I'm going to be careful about that. Lord Lyon and I interact a great deal, but we never manage to meet. We're both so busy. And it's a testament to the way the world is nowadays that I've got to fly all the way to Detroit in order to have a conversation with the man who works in the same city as I do. Such is life. Something like 90% of my activity is now concerned with heraldry, helping people get coats of arms, quite often explaining to them why they can't involve the matters of chiefship and so on. And it's a joy to work with this man. For too long, the Lord Lyon was perceived as the man who said no to everything. Well, this is a man who likes to say yes, and he really is open for business, and he is encouraging everyone who can to exemplify their Scottish ancestry by engaging in some way with coats of arms. And that's not just coats of arms for individuals, but for societies, for corporations. Anything with a Scottish connection can at least ask the question. I will say no more, and I will leave him to illuminate you all the more. Lyon Morrow.
Well, thank you very much for allowing me to come along through this video link. I hope you can all hear me. Could somebody nod if they could hear me? Can you hear me? Excellent. Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity through this technology to speak to you and to congratulate you on your conference, and thank Bruce for his introduction. Bruce and I go back a very long way, and we did work as students together many, many years ago, almost nearly 50 years ago now. I'm still slightly amazed that I can talk to you where you are this afternoon in your time through this medium. But let me first of all, before I get into the substance of my talk, bring you greetings from Scotland and from the court of the Lord Lyon. Many of you will know that the office of Lord Lyon was first recorded in the history books of Scotland in 1318, and so it's a long established officer of state. The first recorded minutes are in the inauguration of the abbot at Arbroath Abbey in 1318, 2 years before the declaration of Arbroath. Very soon we'll be celebrating the 700th anniversary of the founding document of the Scottish nationhood and the strong themes that it contains. The court has remained over all these periods to be one of the last heraldic, genealogical and ceremonial courts of its type in the world, and it is enforced and it is underpinned by the law of Scotland. No other genealogical court, or for that matter heraldic court, has the law of the land behind it. Let me say too that the Lord Lyon has not always been in the form of which you'll find him today. For example, in the time of Robert Burns, the Lord Lyon never set foot in Scotland. He picked up the stipend from the lands, but he lived in Bath in England, eventually dying by falling off a cliff. His name in that latter part of the 18th century was John Hook Campbell. My approach is very different. My approach is to get, in a sense, down and into the activities of the Scottish people, whether they be here in my home county where I sit in Angus tonight, or whether it be in America, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, whatever part of the world in which we live. You need to be clear that my approach has and will continue to be one of modernisation. Sometimes when we talk about heraldry and we talk about things like genealogy, our heads are, and our minds and our hearts are in the past. It's only as we can move these things forward through this generation to the next generation and to modernise that we keep things alive. So I have worked on 3 basic principles. John Knox established in the second book of Discipline schools in every parish in Scotland, and he established the 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic, and the 4th one was religion. For me, the 3 R's of modernising heraldry and genealogy today are: the first is respect. We respect the history, the heritage and the different stories that emerge out of Scottish life here and anywhere else. Second, what we do needs to be resilient. It needs to build up a strong base of resilient facts, figures and evidence that enables us to custom make and approach our own generation with an understanding of what it means to be of Scottish descent. And that, I believe, is part and parcel of the leadership that your conference should be actually promoting. So we respect our traditions, we have a resilience for what we actually do and an evidence base in history and in academia. But we also need to look to renew. So the 3 R's for me are respect for tradition, resilience in our evidence and research, and renewal for the future. If you look at the work of the Court of the Lord Lyon in recent years, we have an increased number of petitions for grants of arms. You heard Bruce Jury talk about that. Many of you sitting in the hall today will have had arms granted by the Lord Lyon. I do not want to see the grant of arms and that particular link it gives into the wonderful work of heraldry and the traditions in Scotland to be something that's exclusive. It needs to be based on an evidence, and it also needs to be brought into the world in which we live today, and that's the renewal. So we've had an increase in the number of petitions before us. And for those of you who are interested in the legal or judicial side of it, I have had more contested cases ranging from the resurrection of ancient baronetcies that had gone dormant to the appointment of clan chiefs and commanders than any Lord Lyon previously this century. And that doesn't seem to be drying up. I have on my desk at the moment a petition for a chiefship of a family name, of which there are 320 historic documents stretching back 300 years. Now, hands up if any of you want to read them and summarise them, because I'll send them by courier to you. But that will be my job between now and Christmas. It's a very technical job, a job that requires you to look at how the legal proof is established in a case. And that's something I find to be very exhilarating. When I decide a case, as many of you will know, has been interested in Scots heritage and genealogy, history and heraldry, there is always another opinion. Someone will say, oh, the Lord Lyon's got it right. Many will say the Lord Lyon's got it wrong. But let me tell you, I don't care what's said. The principal act that I do as Lord Lyon is under the judicial oath of my office, which is I decide without fear or favour. So be clear, it's not because I like you or dislike you that a decision is made either about you or about your families and your genealogies. It's about the only integrity that can be kept in the system is one in which decisions are made without fear or favour, and that the independence of the decisions are maintained. That's important for me. The legal process must be sustained, and it must be part of the outcome. Many of you will have been aware too, if you know the office, that we've had a number of changes in our office staff. Many of you might have known Mrs. Elizabeth Rhodes, who was our Lyon clerk and in the office for 42 years. She's now retired. Russell Hunter is our new Lyon clerk, and I hope that you all welcome him and actually experience what he has is a very skilled public lawyer and a Scottish historian. He will help us grow as he grows into that new post to establish a renewal of the processes within the Lyon Court and how we move forward in our operations. I believe it's only as we maintain a strong legal footing that we're able to maintain this ancient craft of heraldry in a modern world. You'll also have seen pictures or postings about our officers at arms, magnificent in their regalia, but there's a lot that goes behind that in terms of the work that they bring. I've tried as far as possible to involve as many as agents to the Lyon Court. The officers at arms, those who wear the tabard and carry my commission, obviously have rights of audience. But Bruce Jury will tell you that he now has a right of audience to the Lyon Court. And I'm no lot long back from a 4-week tour of Australia, a lecture tour, in which I appointed for the first time an agent in Australia to the Scottish descendants to assist them to produce petitions to the Lyon Court. It is a good thing that we renew and we put a resilience into what we do, and we expand as far as possible what we can in terms of our reach. I'm one of a generation that all of this technology is slightly uncomfortable for me. I'm sitting here in my study thinking that you're looking through the video at my untidy bookcases. I know where everything is, but it's a very sort of exposed media which we operate. But if you want to find out what goes on in the Lyon Court, then we too have attempted to do this by the creation of some social media. Now, I've not decided whether social media such as the Twitter is actually the devil's work or a good thing yet. I'm still out on that. But I do know that our Lyon Court Twitter is able to help us to outreach to those beyond who we might not get to. When I was on the lecture tour in Australia, a young heraldrist in Brisbane set me up on a computer to talk worldwide to a number of young heraldrists. And they typed in the questions and I gave the answer as I tried to eat a very large Turkish meal sitting on the floor with a group of these young heraldrists in Brisbane. It fascinated me and really enlivened me to find out that from Finland to America to Canada to Britain to Russia to Malta, there was young people under the age of 30 that belonged to a group that actually encouraged through social media the study and the understanding of heraldry and genealogy. I found that quite enlivening. That pushed me to open our Twitter account. And if you want to see what's going on in the Lyon Court, sign up. You'll see that I give lectures and talks almost every week, and all over Scotland and beyond. In this last year, I've been, as I said, to Australia and gave 4 lectures on heraldry of different subjects in 6 of the major cities, ending in Sydney to celebrate as the honoured guest the Scottish Heritage Week. And it was wonderful to see there in Australia such an alive Scottish diaspora, hungering for actually what it meant to be a Scot in today's world. One of my duties while I was there was I was inspecting officer of the Australian Scottish Cairn. Many of you won't have heard of that, but at the bicentenary of the founding of Australia, a stone was sent from every parish in Scotland, 1,500 parishes, and built into a cairn outside Sydney, which actually marks the strong physical links between Scotland and Australia. My duty as inspecting officer was to go and see it was in good shape, and then to report to the Queen and the First Minister that it was in good shape. Well, on that day did it rain, and it rained, and it rained. And we got a 5-minute break in the rain, of which myself and a single piper with the crowd went to the cairn to inspect it. And the piper struck up in the tune Bonnie Dundee, because as many of you know, I live just north of Dundee. And the kookaburras outpiped the piper. And it was marvellous to see the nature making sure that in fact even our Scots pipes were put in their place. And I believe that's a story about how culture can help and actually amend what it is it means to be part of Scotland and the living Scotland worldwide. While I was also in Australia, I came across many heraldic treasures. In the Church of St James in Sydney, there is a hatchment, a funeral hatchment of Governor Duff, who was a Scotsman, and it was in perfect condition and preserved and painted on felt. Very unusual indeed. So there was a kind of past history living in that church. Later in the year, I was privileged to be the 74th chieftain of the Fergus Highland Games and Festival in Ontario. Again, to see the number of Scots, Canadians from North America turn out to celebrate what it meant to be a Scot was heartening. And I see that one of the partners within the conference is Guelph University at the Scottish Studies Department there. And I was very privileged to be given a tour of the Guelph University. And I can't show you them because it's too cramped in my study, but I'm wearing the socks of Guelph University, which were presented to me as a gift. And so I think this linking, whether it be where you are in the United States, whether it be that you come from one background or another, whether it be from Australia, here in Angus, or from the University of Guelph and the Fergus Games in Australia, we come to celebrate a living Scotland. If your studies and your leadership within the Scottish culture and heritage movement within North America is simply looking backwards, that's important, and respect must be given to it. But we need a resilience in the work in which is done historically to renew our way forward. So think about that in terms of how you operate. Think about that, how you make alive the living Scotland today and how that's passed on to the next generation. And if we don't, then much of it might get lost. Or even worse, we might be able to start a new movement that makes up our history and the way we do things. One of the most difficult bits for me in terms of actually dealing with Scottish heritage, and particularly within the clan and family life, is to get a discipline into it. Now, that doesn't mean it has to be harsh. It simply means there are rules, there are heritages, there's traditions. But too often today and within our world, those rules, that heritage and that tradition gets laid aside because of individual people's needs or individual people's views. That's where the resilience comes in. The resilience is clearly based on evidence, and that resilience and that evidence which is what feeds the renewal. It's a bigger thing than simply what I want or whether I have this, that or the other thing. It is actually far more about how we keep this living Scotland alive. I believe very clearly, for example, that here in Angus where I live, which is often described as the birthplace of Scotland because of the Declaration of Arbroath, that the only way that we're going to bring alive the questions of nationhood that are reflected by the nobles who signed the Declaration of Arbroath are through the whole Living Scotland movement. You, as you sit there enjoying your lunch, actually share in that renewal and that way forward. So I was asked specifically to look at the question of some of the new movements within the Lyon Court. Well, firstly, I've explained to you earlier that this Lord Lyon is committed to modernise. That doesn't mean the traditions go, that doesn't mean our history is not evidenced, but it does mean that we need to renew. So we try to get things done much more quickly now. We try to communicate in a less technical language. I have no idea, for example, how I'm able to speak to you through this computer, but I know pushing a few buttons allows me to do that. So we don't need to get so caught up in the technical side of it that we lose the ability of what we do. The key to the granting of arms, particularly Scottish arms, is the question of jurisdiction. And many of you will talk, I've heard talks on the past establishing that, for example, that Scots birth, Scots heritage, Scots residency, Scottish organisations all fall under the jurisdiction of the Lord Lyon. I've pushed that a little bit further, and that is that I believe there are people, particularly in your own countries and in North America, that have made such a contribution to the life of Scotland and to its heritage that that should be marked by the granting of arms to them for life. Now, when I suggested that, hands went up in horror. The roof was going to fall in and heraldry had gone to hell. Well, I have a maxim that says that if you try to pilot a thing, you're often able to do it now and to test it. I've now piloted for over a year this idea. Hell hasn't come, although it's been cold enough here in Scotland last winter to imagine it did come. the roof hasn't fallen in, and heraldry hasn't collapsed. And the pilot itself has been partially successful, only because we've had 2 petitioners. So there wasn't the floodgate of activity that was expected. The 2 people who were granted arms for their life were granted them because of the contributions they had made, one to the vibrancy of a very significant clan of Scottish heritage with the support of their chief, and the other was actually to do with the contribution they had made to Highland Games over a long period. So people who were well deserved. But these changes and that extension of the granting of coats of arms to those who may not fit traditionally into it are not, in a sense, matters that should be too concerning to any of us. They are about the renewal of the movement. If you think where you came from in terms of your historical background and your family, you can see that you do things in a very different way from what your family ancestors might. One of my predecessors, Sir Thomas Innes of Lerney, used to dictate to the clan chiefs' wives what shoulder they wore their sashes on. Today, that's not appropriate. It's not wrong to say that, and it wasn't wrong to do it in his generation. But women have a more significant role and are people in their own right in our society that takes that kind of diktat or regulation from the Lord Lyon into a very different era altogether. I have a number of very powerful women Scots friends. If I tried to tell them what they should wear, I think I probably couldn't tell you what I'd be told over this broadcast. So things do move on. It doesn't mean that it's not the tradition that the clan chief's wife wears her sash on a specific shoulder. But it's not now for the Lord Lyon or for anyone to start laying down these diktats. Things move. Things move, as has happened with regard to the movement of the extension of who I will grant arms to. One of the very strong abilities of the Lord Lyon, and you probably can't see it, but above this camera is my commission from Her Majesty the Queen, sealed with the Great Seal of Scotland, 2.5 pounds of beeswax with the Seal of Scotland, the Great Seal of Scotland on it. It bestows on me, and let me read it. It says, "Given and granted to the said Joseph John Morrow and the said office of Lord Lyon King of Arms, all the rights, privileges thereto belonging, and subject to the provisions of the Lord Lyon Scotland Act 1867. Now that act bestows upon the Lord Lyon considerable discretion. Now discretion is not actually exercised willy-nilly, but it does have to be exercised in a way that renews. And so this issue of extending jurisdiction to those with significant and tangible, proven contribution to Scottish heritage and life of the granting of arms is part of what I see that discretion to be about. There is a number of very important and significant people who have done so much for Scotland that should be recognised in this way. I've completed 5 years as Lord Lyon, and I can't believe it. I'm now 65 years old, and if you can see me properly, I'm happy to say I don't look it. I certainly don't feel it, but I don't feel 65. I feel just as alive as I was when I was 25. And in that 5 years, I've begun the process of renewal and modernisation, and about bringing into life this whole living Scotland that you, at your conference, are sharing significantly in. I have some major tasks ahead of me, Our office, if any of you have ever visited it, you're most welcome. And usually you'll go away, not with a cup of coffee, but with a mug with all the arms of the office bearers of the Lord, the court of the Lord lying on it. But our office was last decorated in 1954, the year I was born. So we have a refurbishment exercise to do, and I have no idea how I'm going to get my head round working in the office and actually refurbishing it at the same time. But part of that refurbishment is to digitize all of the documents contained in our office. And the purpose for that is to make them available worldwide free for people to consult. Because our documents, particularly the coats of arms and the genealogies that go alongside them, go back clearly into the middle of the 17th century and some of them before that. But people need access to it. Archives, tradition and history are useless unless there is public access to it. So watch this space. In the next 5 years, my hope is that we get rid of a lot of the kind of older, disused parts of the office furniture and scenery, but also to get a really effective digitization of our documents that you could sit at a computer where you are and actually bring to life. Let me finish the talk by giving you a summary of what I heard a young philosopher from one of our universities talk about. He gave a talk which was about the retiral of St. George. Now, most of you will know the story of St. George and the dragon. It's very clearly part of British history and alive in many people's minds. The question posed by the young philosopher was that what did St. George do in retirement once he had killed the dragon? Well, his initial answer was that St. George went out and continued to kill little dragons till they were all dead. And then he went out and killed all the little demon-looking creatures until they were all dead. And then when that was done, St. George spent his retirement spearing the fresh air. My fear for us within the Scottish heritage movement is that we'll end up in a retirement of spearing fresh air, rather actually than dealing with the problems of how we keep alive the traditions and values of what it means to belong to Scotland in the living worldwide family of Scots. We need to promote our heritage, not by piercing the fresh air, but by real tasks that move us forward to create an environment that is focused clearly on our living and heritage Scotland. You, my friends, alongside me, are part of the living Scotland of our world. And let me thank you for your attention in this address, and I look forward to taking any questions or comments that people would like to make. Thank you all very much.
Good afternoon, Lyon. It's John Belisai. Nice to see you again.
Hello,
sir.
John.
I'm going to coordinate the questions here. I appreciate your willingness to take a few. Does anyone have
You
any
look
questions
excellent in
for
that kilt.
Lyon Morrow? He's not going to bite you.
There's someone.
Here we go. Lord Dunrossell.
How are you, Andrew?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
And how's your lovely wife?
Well, I was just going to apologise and say that I took a picture of you with your shelves behind you and sent it to Cheryl, and she said, "Oh, those shelves are so untidy." So
I can imagine. I can imagine.
She wouldn't let me get away with that. Is all I could say. But to me, it just looks lived in. It looks like you actually use the books, and that's what a good bookshelf should look like. Shell has different views, but anyway, she sends her best regards. And will you be, by any chance, coming to Charleston for the Armigers AGM?
No, I've just written to Hugh Montgomery today to say that I thought that it was an excellent agenda, but I haven't got time to come to Charleston this year. What I have said is that I need to come to the AGM in the next year or so, then maybe next year or the year after. I've got I've just as a way of kind of broadening it. I'm encouraging the new chief herald of Malta to set up his register. The Maltese government have actually created a heraldic register, and the president of Malta is going to receive the first grant 0001. So I've got a planned trip to Malta. Next Monday I go off to Malaysia to do some work in a different field, and then I come home to take my annual leave in Japan. So Charleston's not on the agenda, I'm afraid, but I would love to be with you.
We'll drink a toast in your honour.
Yeah, and I've asked Hugh Montgomery to do the same.
And we'll probably consume your share.
Yeah, good.
Lyon, if I may, John Belisai again, ask a question on behalf of some of the others here. You've talked at length about your process of granting life arms to worthy, deserving people in the diaspora.
Yeah.
They may be interested in knowing how they would go about starting that process. I know there are individuals like Dr. Dury who they can consult with to assist them in preparing the necessary papers and forms and submissions. Is that the first step that they should undertake?
It's a very open process. And for me, the first part of that process, if you think you're someone that should be granted arms as a life grant rather than by right of the traditional jurisdictions, then it would be helpful to make the case about what the significant contribution you've made. Because as soon as the petition comes in, that's when things start to kick in more administratively. So an open discussion with somebody like Bruce, or even directly with myself, will get that answer to you. In Scots heraldry, for a grant of arms, we work under three principles. Once the jurisdiction's established, and once that the decision's made that you're a virtuous and well-deserving person, and I'm the sole judge of that, so any of you that's got a bottle of malt whiskey is home and dry. And the next stage then is to look at the design. And we follow the family name as far as possible. We personalise it around yourself. And I'm very keen to keep arms simple so that people can read them. So a complicated set of arms doesn't say that they belong to John or to Andrew or to me. It's difficult for people to read. And we'll take you through that process. The process then moves towards an agreed design with me, and then we have to wait for a painter. All of our arms are painted onto vellum with very ancient techniques, and there's simply not enough heraldic painters around to be able to do that. And so there's a delay, and then the arms are actually sent to you for your own display. Very simple process, easy. But I think if you're going to come under a life grant, if you can't prove an established jurisdiction under the traditional methods, then it'd be useful to gather the evidence about what your significant contribution has been to Scotland or to Scottish life, and at home or overseas. And as I say, one of the lady that we granted arms to, she had been a great supporter of the MacGregor clan stalls around the different games, and she had done it for a long period. And Sir Malcolm was very keen to support her application, and it was very straightforward. So that would be the first stage, and then you get into the technical application of putting the petition in, and I take over at that stage when that takes place. But be clear, Bruce is correct. My approach is one to say yes, and only to say no if in fact it doesn't fit with good reasons. I'm not a gatekeeper by nature or by temperament. This is something that needs to be renewed in a much more lively way.
Thank you very much, sir. after we finish this later in the day, if you have questions about exactly how to go about that, I suggest you talk to Dr. Dory because he is before Lyon Court frequently on these matters. Do we have another question or two? Yes, ma'am.
Lyon, my name is Ann Wright Campbell, and I'm a proud Dundonian. I came
Excellent.
to this country 2 years after you were born. But I just want you to know where I was born was 17 Rosefield Street, and that was the tenement that was bombed.
Right, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was my parents, and I was 2 years old at that time.
Right. Well, I mean, I know the area very well indeed, and Dundee is a city that's been in transition. I suspect as the city you're in has been in transition, but we now have the magnificent Victoria and Albert Museum, which is formed around the whole concept of design. But I'm very happy to know that we've got a Dundonian there, and that you're still proud to be part of Dundee.
Before I left Dundee, I worked for the town clerks of Montefiore.
All right.
For lawyers.
Right.
And they were both town clerks of Montefiore. I'm sure you're familiar
Excellent.
with that place too. Right?
Excellent. Do you ever come home?
I do. 2011 was the last time I was home. But I'll be back to see the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Well, you must let me know because if I'm in Dundee, I'll be very happy to have a coffee with you and discuss the museum's development.
Thank you very much.
Lyon, are there other trips to the States that you have planned in the next year or two?
Next year, I kind of think I need to get the dates for. Well, first of all, the first thing is that sometimes I'm invited to do things. I went out to the Fergus Highland Games in August and I really had a great time, absolutely great time. I loved them. I have to say that the highlight for me, besides the games, was they took me to see Niagara Falls, and while it's very commercial there, it is one of the wonders of the world. And I know that many of you will be Americans, but I have to side with the Canadians and say that the Canadian sides of the falls are really much better than the American side of the falls. But it was a most wonderful experience. They asked me to go back next year, to the games, and I've said no, not because I don't want to. It's because there's limited times I can be out the country, and I'm looking to kind of take a trip a wee bit further back to the States, to a different area. Also, the last lady might know that Dundee is linked to Alexandria, and I'm now taking part in the Alexandrian Dundee link. So I hope to come back to the Washington area to renew some of the contacts there, because my old friend John Letford, who was our Lord Provost in Dundee and City Mayor, equivalent City Mayor, he's become less able to travel, and he was a great link. So I'm hoping to be able to promote that particular link. But at the moment, no other plans to come to the States. I know I've got Malta in January, and I've just come back from doing some work with the Portuguese, which was fascinating, on their heraldry and their nobility traditions. So that's where I am at this point in the year. But it'll soon fill up, I would think.
Well, Lyon, as you know, I'm in Washington, D.C.
I know that.
Please let me know, and we'll put together quite a party for you.
I had a most wonderful experience when I went to Washington for the 20th anniversary of Scotland Week. I stayed at a place called the Cosmos Club, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And on the second morning, this is an amusing story. On the second morning, I was standing in full Highland regalia waiting for someone to pick me up. And a very elderly lady who came across in a Zimmer, and she walked towards me, and she introduced herself and said she was 97. And she asked me, she said that she always wanted to marry a Scottish laird. And was I a Scottish laird? And I said I was very sorry I wasn't, but I wasn't available to marry either. And she said to me in this very twinkled voice, she said, well, can you tell me, what do you have under your sporran? And I said, well, that's for me to know. And so I have very fond memories of my trip to Washington. And also one of my previous students, Timothy Cole, is actually now in a charge near Washington. And I just signed his membership for the St. Andrews Society of Washington this week so he can join. So there's lots of connections there. So I very much think I will be back in Washington.
That's wonderful to hear. And please give my regards to John Ledford. He's a good friend of our St. Andrews.
He's a good chap. Failing, but good chap.
Camilla Hellman has a question for you, Lyon.
Good afternoon, Lord Lyon.
Hello.
We hope we're going to see you in New York too, but we've got to
Yeah, I
get
know.
organised. We keep talking about it.
And it crosses over. I was
The question is very quickly about all of the work you've been doing around recognising clan chiefs.
Yes.
Clans that have not had a chief for so many years, and there seems to have been several instances recently where this has been happening. And I wondered if you could comment a bit further on that, because it's wonderful to see this happening. When I was at Grandfather Mountain a few weeks ago, I spoke to the Baird clan, who said that they were about to come to Scotland to celebrate 300 your work around that for the first time in 300 years. And I know there have been other instances, and I just wondered if you could touch on that.
The clan structure in terms of itself is not run by the Lord Lyon, but the Lord Lyon, where appropriate, appoints the clan chief or a commander where the chief has died, or the line has died out. There are two methods to do that. One is that there can be a court case raised in front of me as a judge, and they produce all the evidence, and I decide who wins, or whether or if the case has been proved, and I grant them the right to be chief of the name and arms of. So a classic example of that that was done recently was the Buchanan, and Buchanan chiefship had fallen into abeyance. And what happened was that somebody who was a relative of the last chief through the maternal line petitioned me, brought the evidence, and I was convinced that he was actually the only possible survivor to the chiefship. And I've granted a warrant to say that he's now chief of the name and arms of Buchanan, and there'll be an inauguration next year. When I was in Australia, the Malcolm Buchanan, who's one of the heads of the Scottish Heritage Week, was ecstatic because they'd got a chief. So that's one method. The other method is where there is no identifiable hereditary chief, is to move to what is called a family convention, where the clan itself gets together and decides they would like to appoint for a period under my direction a commander to pull together the clan to see if they want to move towards identifying a new chiefly line. Now, normally I'll expect the commanders to be in place for 10 years, 2 5-year appointments, and they'll normally have to look to see that there is no other hereditary claimant for the clan chiefship there. And then we could move towards the possibility of them becoming the chief. Good example of this was the Gunn clan. They had a number of commanders for decades. And Ian Gunn of Banniskirk eventually came and asked if I would appoint him again as commander. And I said no. And they got very upset. But it was my sense of humour, and I said I wanted to appoint him chief because he'd been long enough a commander. Now, he is now chief of the name and arms of Gunn. That gets registered, and there's a period of prescription which is quite considerable where it can be challenged. So the timescales are very long here. And then eventually he will be established as the undisputed chief of the Guns, and that sets a new lineup. Now that's done because the law is based on Celtic law, not on feudal law. If you are an earl, for example, in Scots peerage, or even UK peerage, only your son, eldest son, of the blood can generally inherit. There are other exceptions, but generally it's legitimate son of the blood. But that's never been the position within clan life. You'll know if you look at your clan history that sometimes a chief will appoint the next chief. Sometimes he will miss a son and go to the daughter, or sometimes he may miss a son and go to a cousin. There has always been a fluidity about how chiefs are appointed. The normal method is through the eldest son or the eldest daughter of the bloodline who retains the name. But there is a much more fluidity. And the Lord Lyon really now, since about 1867 Act, has had the ability to create that environment. Now, why do I do it? If there's anything that makes complete nonsense to me, it's the idea of a clan without a chief. The whole concept of clan or family is about being under the headship and leadership of someone who is recognised as the chief of that clan. But also through that clan chiefship or headship, there is a discipline of the clan that comes into place, because that's how things are regulated. It's not an autocratic office. It's one of which the chief reigns with the love and affection and consensus of his actual clansfolk. And so I'm very keen to move the whole area forward where there is clans without chiefs, to having chiefs, even if we go through the step of having a commander. And I think I'm fair to say that I'm now getting, for this century, the reputation of appointing more commanders and more chiefs than any Lord Lyon before. And it's not running out. I have another one or two claimants for chiefships through the legal case management, and there's a number of cases where clans or families wish to have a commander. That's all the good news. Let me give you a little bit of a warning. When a family convention takes place, and there is someone decided by that family convention, which is the clan or the family's right to do, when clan bickering, or when there is qualified comments, particularly about the candidate that's been successful, and all that kind of inter-family activity that we're all aware takes place within our own families takes place, I will often not ratify the decision, because I don't believe that that clan or that family has reached a consensus and a collaboration that will allow the chiefship or the commandership of that person to pull them together as a body. Now, I've had a couple of experiences where we've gone through the process, everybody's been delighted, and then somebody who was disgruntled with the process starts on the social media. And I've had to actually say, stop. This is not what this is about. This is a moment of celebration for your clan and for your family. And there will be disappointed candidates as well as successful candidates. But I'm not prepared to sign an interlocutor verifying that when in fact the kind of contention becomes overwhelming and actually is negative towards the process. But that's the only negative thing that I would say, and I think I've only done that in one case now, where I've said, I'm not sure you've got the consensus here, I'm not sure this process has worked, come back in 3 years' time, when you've sorted out what it is that you're looking for, and actually that you can give to the man or the woman elected as commander the support that's necessary. The wonderful thing, though, about clan law, particularly as it's based on that Celtic legal structure, is that women have always had the potential to be clan chiefs. Madam Hunter of the Clan Hunter from Ayrshire is actually one of our excellent chiefs, hereditary chiefs in Scotland. And we should be now, in the world in which we live, moving beyond. I can obviously see there's a hunter there, is there? There's any hunters at the table there? Give us a wave, the hunters.
Yeah, we have Reverend Hunter here.
Yeah, well done, well done, well done. Well, you'll know how good she is, Madam Hunter. And actually, this diversity and this equality within clan activity is something that's far more significant in the modern world than actually the feudal inheritance that takes place through bloodlines. That was a long talk to you. The other thing I wanted to say to you about your question is last night I went to a very splendid dinner in the Glasgow Council banqueting hall, and the Lord Provost of Glasgow was saying how much she enjoyed being in New York at the parade. She said that there's no one does parades like New York. And that's something coming from someone who's the civic leader of Glasgow, because Glaswegians think that nobody can do it like the Glaswegians. But she thinks that New York knows how to hold a parade, and the Tartan Parade was one of her highlights when she visited New York.
Lyon, Ian Hunter here asked me to remind you about Pauline Hunter.
Yeah.
I think you know.
Yeah, she's Madam Hunter, Pauline Hunter, yeah.
One more question, and then we have to say goodbye to Lord Lyon. He's spent quite a bit of time with us. We appreciate it. One more question. Going once, going twice. I think that's it, sir. Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Well,